All right, good morning, Algebra 1. Today we are doing solving quadratic equations, day 7, solving using quadratic formula. Our learning target is I can solve quadratic equations algebraically. Your homework for today is Quadratics worksheet number 12. All right, so today we will learn how to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula allows us to solve quadratic equations that we might not be able to factor. For example, x squared plus x plus 1 equals 0 cannot be factored by solving since x squared plus x plus 1 is not factorable. But we can use the quadratic formula to solve. The quadratic formula, x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I have a fun little song that my high school teacher taught me how to memorize it. So I'm going to go ahead and sing it for you. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I know my singing is not very good, but that is honestly a great way to help you memorize it. Give it a little tune to go with it, and it works well. So we will get the values of a, b, and c from our equation in standard form. Okay? Recall, standard form is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay? So, solve the following quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. So, this is my A, this is my B, and this is my C. I'm going to go ahead and write it over here. My A is 1, my B is negative 2, my C is negative 4. And now I'm going to put that into our quadratic equation or quadratic formula. So, x equals negative b. So my b is negative 2, so it's really the opposite. So it's going to be a positive 2 plus or minus square root b squared, so negative 2 squared, minus 4. My a is 1, my c is negative 4, all over 2a, and my a is 1. Okay? Clean this up a little bit, so we get x equals 2 plus or minus the square root negative 2 squared, that's saying negative 2 times negative 2. So that is a positive 4. And then negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. And then negative 4 times negative 4 is a positive 16. So that gives us 4 plus 16 all over 2 times 1 is 2. All right, so then we get x equals 2 plus or minus the square root. 4 plus 16 is 20 over 2. All right, but now I'm going to go ahead and break down the square root of 20. So that will factor into the square root of 4 and the square root of 5. Okay, the square root of 4 is 2. We cannot take the square root of 5, so it stays 2 radical 5. So now we will rewrite that as x equals 2 plus or minus 2 radical 5 all over 2. So now what I'm going to look at is the numbers outside of the radical, okay, in the numerator and in the denominator. And I'm going to see if I can take the greatest common factor from all three of those numbers. In this case, I can factor out a 2 from all of three of these numbers. So when I factor out that 2, that gives me x equals plus or minus the square root of 5. Because I factor out a 2, so 2 divided by 2 is 1. And so you can leave all of those ones there, or you can just put plus plus minus the square root of 5. So that would be x equals plus radical 5, comma, minus radical 5 for your answer. All right, now we are going to go ahead and move on to the second example. We have x squared plus 3x minus 4. So again, label that A, B, and C, okay? We're going to go ahead and put those over on the left-hand side. So my A is 1, my B is 3, my C is negative 4. So again, your formula is x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so we're going to use that formula again. So x equals negative b, so it'll be a negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4ac. My a is 1, my c is negative 4. All over 2a, so 2 times 1. Okay? So then that gives me x equals negative 3 plus or minus square root. 3 squared is 9. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 4 is a positive 16. All over 2 times 1 is 2. All right, now I have x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root. 9 plus 16 is 25, all over 2. Okay, now I'm going to take the square root of 25, so that gives me x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 25 is 5, all over 2. All right, now I'm going to break that up into two separate equations. So I'll have x equals negative 3 plus 5 over 2. And then I'll have x equals negative 3 minus 5 over 2. All right, so negative 3 plus 5 is a positive 2 over 2. And then x equals negative 3 minus 5 over 2. Negative 3 minus 5 gives me a negative 8 over 2. So my final answer is x equals 2 over 2 reduces to 1. And then x equals negative 8 over 2 reduces to negative 4. So there are my two answers. You could write it like that as your final answer on a quiz or a test. Or you could write it as x equals 1 comma negative 4. Either one works. Moving on to the back page, we are going to do more with the quadratic formula. But this one is what happens when we don't end up with a perfect square under the radical. So that's happened to us a few times, and that's okay. We are going to continue to look at how we would problem solve to make it work. All right, so first thing we're going to do is to label our A, B, and C. So this is my A, this is my B, this is my C. And I'm going to put those numbers over here. So A is 1, B is negative 1, and C is negative 3. All right, go ahead and substitute those into your quadratic formula. So x equals negative b. So a negative 1 is a positive 1 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So negative 1 squared minus 4. My a is 1. My c is negative 3. All over 2. And my a is 1 again. All right, so x equals 1 plus or minus the square root. Negative 1 squared, that's saying negative 1 times negative 1. So that would be a positive 1. And then negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 3 is a positive 12. All over 2 times 1 is 2. All right, so then we get x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 13 over 2. Okay? Now we're going to break those up into two separate equations. We cannot take the square root of 13, so we're going to leave it radical 13. So you would get x equals 1 plus radical 13 over 2, comma, x equals 1 minus radical 13 over 2. And those would be your two answers. Okay? Go ahead and try that next one on your own. Pause the video while you're trying it on your own, and then when you unpause it, all of the steps will be on the screen for us to go through together. All right, so you may have gotten all the way through the entire problem, or you might have gotten stuck somewhere along the way. So we're going to go through it together and finish out the problem together. So I start with substituting a, b, and c into the quadratic formula. So that gives me x equals -4 plus or minus square root 4 squared minus 4 times 2 times -1, all over 2 times 2. So then reduce it a little bit. You get x equals -4 plus or minus square root 16 plus 8. I get 16 from 4 squared, and I get 8 from I get 8 from -4 times 2, which is -8, and then -8 times -1, which is +8, and then all over 4, and that comes from the 2 times 2. Simplifying it a little bit more, we get x equals -4 plus or minus square root of 24 over 4. All right, now I need to factor down 24, the square root of 24, and so that gives me the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. The square root of 4 is 2, and then we can't take the square root of 6, so it just stays 2 radical 6. Remember, when you do this step right here, when you are factoring down those numbers, okay, one of them has to be a perfect square. In this case, 4 is my perfect square, so that's why I picked 4 and 6. All right, so then I get x equals -4 plus or minus 2 radical 6 over 4. So now I'm going to simplify, and looking at these three numbers right here, what can I factor out of all three of those numbers? I can factor out a 2. So for my final answer, it would be x equals -2 plus or minus, you can put 1 radical 6 over 2. Okay? And then let's go ahead and split those up like we have been doing. So we get x equals -2 plus 1 radical 6 over 2, comma, x equals -2 minus 1 radical 6 over 2. So those would be your two answers. All right, let's go ahead and do this last one together. So first thing we're going to do is label your A, your B, and your C. All right, so my A is 1, my B is 8, my C is -4. Okay, so then I get x equals -8 plus or minus square root 8 squared minus 4. My A is 1, my C is -4, all over 2a, so 2 times 1. All right, so that gives me x equals -8 plus or minus the square root of 8 squared is 64. And then -4 times 1 is -4. Negative 4 times negative 4 is a positive 16 all over 2, because 2 times 1 is 2. All right, so then we get x equals negative 8 plus or minus square root. The square root of 80, 64 plus 16 is 80, all over 2. All right, now we need to break down 80. Again, making sure one of them is a perfect square, okay? The largest perfect square that you can get. In this case, the square root of 80 breaks down into the square root of 16 times the square root of 5. The square root of 16 is 4, and we can't take the square root of 5, so it stays 4 radical 5. Whoops, don't know why it turned into my green pen. All right, so now we're going to substitute that in for the square root of 80, and that gives us x equals negative 8 plus or minus 4 radical 5 over 2. Now we need to look at what number can I take out of 8, 4, and 2. So the largest number I can take out of all three of them is 2. So that gives me x equals negative 4 plus or minus 2 radical 5. All right. If you want to put it over 1, you can. That is fine. All right. And then I'm going to write my two separate answers. One is adding, one is subtracting. So I get x equals negative 4 plus 2 radical 5, comma, x equals negative 4 minus 2 radical 5. And that would be your final answer. All right. Enjoy your homework today. Remember, it's worksheet number 12. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.